Hi, I'm Joe Puckett. Thanks for joining me. Are you covered by your church's liability insurance? What if you have to take someone into custody, detain them, and they get hurt? What if you have a shooting at your church? Is your liability covered? Are you covered in that situation? We have Adam Sheridan, an independent insurance agent that's here today to help us answer these questions and help you determine if you're covered. Some of us have talked about or under the impression this comes from our leaders sometimes. Don't ask, don't tell kind of thing when it comes to
Right.
security. It's like, okay, we've got 3 or 4 guys that are or gals that are armed in the church and we're kind of organizing, but our leader says, I don't want to know about it. And is that a good perspective to have from the insurance perspective?
You still have to treat your church like a business. So those in leadership, whether it's the minister or leadership team that you have, there's certain decisions that still have to have a business aspect to them, and you've got to know what's going on in the church and how to best prepare your team. And a lot of companies too, they want to see the type of manuals and written policies and procedures you have in place. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get better rates because of that. A church that has written out procedures on security events, on anything in the church, they're probably going to be a more well-run and more organized church, which in turn probably leads to a less likelihood of claims down the road.
If we were to have this kind of undercover team, if you will, and something does happen, we're not necessarily going to be covered then, are we? Because we didn't talk about that in the initial writing of the policy.
Well, and that's why I go back to make sure to have that conversation with the insurance agent, with the insurance company. Some companies do have exclusions. Some companies exclude volunteers, except most likely it's probably not paid security team in most churches. That is one area where, especially where every state is different, some companies can offer an additional option to cover volunteers depending on kind of what's going on. And most companies, a lot of times, will exclude volunteers. So you need to know up front what their process is and what their ruling is on something. Now, again, if you can shoot out a specific claim scenario, and the insurance company is probably going to kind of sidestep it a little bit just because every situation is so incredibly different and it's going to be evaluated independently. It's not always just a black and white area. There's a lot of gray area there that can happen, but at least looking at like you mentioned at the beginning, when I tried to do a little bit of preparation for this episode, is I went to the insurance companies just with a variety of questions and said, hey, we're not looking at any specific claim scenarios right now, but on a general basis, what needs to be happening here in this instance? How can we best advise churches to, if they want coverage for volunteers? Some don't want it, just because obviously having your own security team, having volunteers at the church, it increases the liability for the church, which means it's probably going to increase some premiums a little bit. Again, if you don't do that, what's the flip side of it? If you aren't having that conversation to cover volunteers or cover a security team, what if something goes sideways? You could end up having a much greater exposure to the church, short-term and long-term, financially as well, rather than if you did maybe address it on the front end, creating it may be a year-to-year increase in premiums or something like that, but a better overall risk management and protection for the church members.
You're saying volunteers. So I'm a church security team member, and basically if this church doesn't specifically write that in there, then there's a good chance I'm not covered. Is that correct?
You may not be covered if you get injured.
Okay.
I'll put it that way. So if you were to get injured, whether it's spraining your ankle, walking around the church just surveying, or actually being involved in an incident, there could be a chance where your own medical insurance would have to pick up anything that would happen to you first. Essentially, you have 3 options when it comes to having a security team. You can hire off-duty law enforcement personnel. You can hire a legitimate armed security team, which most churches don't have the resources, and most churches aren't even in cities where that's available.
Right.
Or it's what most churches do. You assemble and you maintain your own security force. But then who's running that security force? It's probably some people that have some off-duty or have some law enforcement experience. Some may not. Some may have some military experience from 30 years ago that they're applying now. But state laws and regulations and everything have changed over that time. So it's good to have the proper training in place and be checking with insurance companies to know, hey, what can we do to try to best protect our security team, try to best protect our church, its church members, and the future of the church.
So each one of those, so insurance is analyzing each one of those, then how how skilled are the folks running the team? How skilled are the folks that are on the team? Those kind of things then.
Yeah, because what they want to see, like it goes back to having some written policies and procedures in place. Churches want to see that so that you're not just, they want to know your church in the wild, wild west. And it's just
Right.
going to be kind of shoot first, ask later type situation.
Right.
And so and like I said, most companies will have additional questionnaires or what they call supplemental forms to make sure, hey, you guys do have the right procedures in place. Yes, we can provide this limit of coverage for certain claim scenarios. Or if you don't have the proper stuff in place, they may say, no, we're not going to provide coverage for you here because you guys don't have the proper controls in place to have this going on.
I'm not as concerned as a church security member about me falling down and hurting myself. So going into the workman's comp.
Right.
But I am concerned about if I try to detain someone, I'm waiting for police to show up and I injure them accidentally. Am I going to be covered under the church's policy, or does that have to be specifically written in there kind of thing that I'm going to be covered as a church security volunteer?
Right, and that's a key one where I specifically would take that to every insurance company. We're an independent agency, so we work with quite a few different insurance companies that insure churches. And it's not always about, hey, which one can give the best rate. Some of them may exclude instances like that. And so it's good to know and have that up front saying, hey, here's what we may have going on. How can we, in the event that someone comes onto the church and has to be on the church campus and has to be detained, how can we protect the church and the security team best in this situation? That one would be able to give a more black and white answer depending on the insurance company for scenarios such as that. Getting your own personal insurance, that one's a lot tougher. I mean, there obviously people know about umbrella policies and that type of thing, but when you're working in an act for the church, at the end of the day, it's a business too.
Right.
When you're doing that, that's when that could be a lot trickier on the personal side because it'd be a lot tougher to find coverage on the personal side for an event such as that. My wife's a guidance school counselor or a guidance counselor at a local elementary school. I can find her coverage for a professional side of things because she's a professional, been through training, been through education. So I can find coverage there. Finding coverage for an individual or an off-duty police officer or something like that in this type of event would be tougher to find. And on the other side, you're probably going to have a lot tougher time getting individuals to maintain that coverage and pay that premium for that coverage in a scenario that they can find what they need for it. So it's kind of twofold. It's if you've got a church security team and all 10 members find a policy like that and take it out to protect themselves, is the church then going to make sure that they're keeping it up every 3 months, 6 months, a year to keep that in place to limit the liability on the church? So it becomes a lot extra legwork on both the church and the individual to make sure that coverage is in place, where ideally, again, I think it's just going back to the church insurance company to make sure they have it in place.
And so if there's any question on that, are we probably better off to make sure we have our own umbrella policy? If there's any question on whether we're covered?
I recommend an umbrella policy anyways, just because it's so cheap. In most states, they're so cheap and they give discounts on your home and auto for having it anyways. And so I always recommend having umbrella policies just because it can't go over your personal liability coverage if you do have a homeowner's policy. It's good to have it. Now, again, can it apply in a scenario like this? Again, I think it would be tough for insurance companies to pay a claim if something did happen. There is a duty to defend there on your homeowner's coverage, and that can be picked up, but there may not be if a jury was to award such and such amounts of damages, there may not be coverages like this because you're acting as a member of the church rather than as an individual.
So then they would go back to the church's insurance kind of thing and see if that's available or not.
And then if the church has it excluded, then you're out of pocket personally on it.
So it seems like it's a little bit more complicated than I even thought, but you just have to talk about it.
That is the key. And again, that's what I try and stress so much to my clients is I try to tell my clients too, there are no stupid questions. Like there's no stupid questions, off the wall questions all the time. But I would so much rather have those up front than have to tell somebody, I'm sorry, your claim's not going to be covered. We don't have coverage for you on that. That's not a conversation I ever want to have.
And if we're not talking about it with you, there might be a chance we don't have coverage for it. Just a general liability
100%.
policy may not cover these kind of things.
Right. Yeah. Wow. I mean, and it's not just, and that's across the entire industry, whether insurance industry, whether it's any kind of business, not just churches. It's people buy liability coverage or buy property coverage, and they think they're fine until they're not.
So it's just a lot of details is really what you're telling me. It's a lot of, so I need to be asking my church, did we specifically write in there, are you covering the church security team? Are you covering me if I break somebody's leg accidentally or if I shoot somebody? We need to talk about each scenario then, don't we?
I think that's definitely a conversation that needs to be had with, I think every church should have that conversation with their insurance agent, with their insurance company, and know exactly, or at least have a general idea of, and that's what I always try to do. I try to tell the insurance companies the story, whether it's the business, the church, whatever it may be. And I say, hey, here's what they have going on. Here's what they have in place. Again, if you've got like most churches do, if you've got your church members or your church security team, how can we best train them? How can we best cover them? To try and cut. Now, again, like I said before, you can't possibly cover everything out there under the sun that can happen just because it's too much of a variance there.
Right.
But on a wide scope of things, how can we provide the broadest coverage available there? And so, and this is like you mentioned, we see it in the news every day. Unfortunately, you see more violence and more shootings and more just one-off events happening. And so these insurance companies know that they're aware. They're not just going to try and hide under the desk and just hope and pray it never happens. They know what happens. And so they know they have a responsibility as well to help build in the best coverage they can as well for their policyholders. But again, I will say too, it's like most policies, a lot of times stuff up front, especially if the insurance policy seems too good to be true, too cheap to be true. So you need to always dig in deeper and ask a few more questions and find out exactly, hey, what's being covered here. And even though this insurance policy over here may be an extra $5,000 a year, what's it covering? If it's actually giving us our church the coverage we need,
right?
Let's make that happen.
So, is there any other thoughts you have for us then? I think that's.
The biggest thing with getting started, it's just, you need to have an emergency response plan in place, regardless. Like I'm in rural Kentucky, we have a lot of small churches that are less than 100 members.
Right.
And it's hard. When you have a smaller congregation, your church security team is probably only 4 or 5 people that get rotated through every week. Is something going to happen at their church? Probably not. But you can never say with certainty, hey, nothing's going to happen here. So then the question becomes is how can you be best prepared? Have conversations with your church leadership, have conversations with the insurance agent, with the insurance company. Find that stuff out up front. Take a few extra minutes, ask those questions, and try to get answers to those questions. If you have a church security team, get training. You want your people, just like employees in a business, you want your people best equipped to handle what may come their way. Get proper training for them. Clear it with the insurance companies. Say, hey, here's what we have. Do you all have any resources? Because they probably got some resources they can provide, whether it's videos or they may even be able to recommend, hey, there's someone that's 2 hours away from you, but they'll probably come down and put on a seminar for you sometime, or work with your local community. I'd say this isn't a question that just one church has in a community. You can probably work with the local chamber of commerce or something and say, hey, we need help putting on a seminar to help train all the security teams across the county or across the city, whatever it may be. How can you help us put that on so that we can better prepare not just our churches throughout our community?
So the better prepared we are then. So this idea of don't tell or, well, we do the best we can is definitely not as good as having our ducks in a row, having our policy, our emergency response plan, and getting training and stuff as best as we can.
We know we can't prepare for everything, but if the more we can prepare for, the better suited everyone's going to be.
Yeah.
Both the church and the insurance company. And that's the thing too. Insurance companies want to know what's going on. They can look at 10 different churches and think they have a general idea of what each church is and what each church does. But they want to know what's going on in the church. And the more they know, the more they can help.
Right.
Insurance companies get painted as this big bad wolf. Yeah. And I'm not saying they can't be. Some of them can be. But really in the true scope of things, they want to help. They want to be there to offer the best coverages for you.
And realistically, the more they know is a benefit to us as well. Honestly. The more they need to know, and we really need them to know so that we make sure that we're covered.
100%. Again, because the worst thing that could happen, you don't want the insurance company did not know something because you're doing a don't ask, don't tell type policy, then you have an event occur, and the insurance company has to come back and say, yeah, sorry, you never discussed that with us. We didn't know that. We could have covered it, but since we didn't know what was going on, we can't cover it. And so there's no coverage here.
Right.
You don't want that conversation and that answer to come back.
We don't want to pay those steep policy prices, but when it comes down to it, we need the coverage. I mean, on this, especially this area.
Right.
I sure appreciate you being here. This is good stuff to help us.
No, I appreciate you having me. I mean, honestly, the biggest thing church insurance companies are looking at right now is rising building costs and inflation and everything else to battle with that. So one of these liability questions may actually be something easy they look forward to working on compared to dealing with these just crazy building and lumber prices that they're dealing with right now.
And when we come to you as an independent, you're an independent agent. You're looking to go out and find us a good deal.
Well, and that's our job, is to navigate the marketplace for you. So it's our job to find out, what do you guys have going on? What are some policies and procedures you have in place? Take it to however many companies each independent agent has, and then try to narrow down and find the best ones for you. Now, some companies want to come out, they want to come do an on-site inspection, walk through the church, check fire extinguishers, make sure they're being serviced, check specific rooms as far as daycare, counseling rooms, make sure those doors have windows on them, and that there's proper procedures in place there to prevent any type of future liability claims from that angle. And then just getting the church security makeup as a whole. Are there security cameras? What's the security team in place? What kind of experience do they have? Training? So it's, every insurance policy is different, and every insurance company is different. Every state is different. We know that, and I've harped on that a lot. That's our role, is to help you, hold your hand and walk through that process to find the best option for you.
I want to thank you for watching. And as always, leave a comment in the section below, and like and subscribe. That helps us spread the word more as we continue to grow and get this important words out, like Adam has here, that his expertise that he can share with us. We want to make sure that we're able to connect with you and share that kind of stuff with you. And take a look at this next video right here. Be the next one you want to watch in your church security journey.
Well, I think the main rule of thumb to remember: every state, every church, we're all different. We all operate different. Every insurance company is different. So everything is always going to be a case by case basis. What I always tell my customers is I'd rather have a what if than an uh-oh. So I'll
Yeah.
always like to get those questions up front. If I don't have the answer immediately, it's why we work so closely with our insurance companies, so we can go to different underwriters, find the right insurance company for a specific church or a specific situation, and say, hey, here's the situation we have. Is this something you all can cover for us, or what's the best way to help guide church members and church security teams on certain topics?
Right. Excellent. So should we be asking those questions? I mean, honestly, should we avoid the questions, or should we talk to our insurance agent about each one of these items that concern us?
I think it's better to bring it up, because some church companies actually have additional questionnaires that they want answered. Some encourage training, because that's the thing. I mean, at the end of the day, you want everyone to be better trained, regardless of scenario, whether it's something security, whether it's anything involving the church. You want to be prepared in any event. I mean, it could be a
Right.
weather event. It could be, I mean, in Kentucky, in the last 2.5 years, we have had significant weather events. We've had tornado, we've had hail, we've had a lot of events, and sometimes your churches double as a warming center, or a kind of a regrouping center. And if those churches get wiped out, then what's your response? Then what's your plan? So I
Right.
always think it's better to have a plan for everything. And if you can be prepared, now you can't prepare for everything, obviously, but the more time you spend preparing and training ahead of time, the better prepared you're going to be if and when something does happen.
Right. Right. So we do want to be discussing these things with our agent then, right down to the details of, because so might it be that some agents or some insurance carriers want to know that you're doing lots of training, and do others not want to know? I mean, they just don't want to deal with it.
They typically do want to know on the front end, because they may even have some resources they can offer and say, "Hey, this is what you're doing. Here's what you need to consider doing." Or they may be able to refer different training resources as well. Some will say, "Hey, just get your local law enforcement to come by and help train on different strategies, tactics, entries, exits, maybe whatever your entire plan is." But then also go back to, I mean, if you've got a church conference, whatever type of association you may be a part of, go to them. I guarantee they have resources as well that help guide you, or at least provide a template, or worst case scenario, give you a starting point. Say, hey, start here and build from this point.
Sure. Sure.
And
So
some church companies will exclude specific things. So if you aren't asking that up front, you may have exclusions on a church policy that you don't realize are on there.
so we want to be discussing that each issue that we have a concern about. We want to talk about that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
So, because some of us are